People often ask, how does the persecuted church help me? I think there are lots of stories that provide a kind of faith boost, because sometimes we're not necessarily meant to get through on your own experience of God. You access other people's too, and that gives you a bigger picture of God. So there are lots of people that I've met that give me a faith boost. I think of one. Her name was Sister Anne. Now, she had lived an amazingly sheltered life. All her life, she had just lived in one house in Shanghai and looked after her brothers, one after another, who had gradually withered from some disease, and she had nursed them to their deaths. She'd never been outside the city. She'd never had any education. She was just a nurse. She wasn't treated very well by her family. And when her final brother was dying, he said, "When I'm gone, dig up the flagstone in the corner of the room. You'll find some coins there. It'll help you for the future." So she did after he was gone. And she noticed there was quite a stack of coins. And she realized that he had stolen them from a Chinese mafia. And she thought, well, what do I do with this? This is quite a fortune. She went to the house churches, and they said, what can you do? She said, well, I can't really do anything. They said, well, just give us the money then. We'll make sure it goes for the work of God. But she thought, am I really too old to be any use? So what she did was she began to travel around the country with this fortune. She went, as it was called then, soft sleeper, which was first class on all the trains. She was about 85 at the time, and she was beginning to die of consumption. But that's what she did for the last few years of her life. She just traveled all around China, and everywhere she went, she just talked about Christ. She thought, that's the one thing I can do. And she met some very important people. Some people got very angry when she would speak to them. And she said, well, what are you going to do? Throw me off the train? I'm an 85-year-old lady. The time I spoke to her, just about a year before she died, I said to her, have you seen any fruit? She said, no, I haven't. I just talked to people, but no one's professed faith. No one's said, oh, that's wonderful, thank you. No, they just listen and nothing happens. Well, years later, I had a friend who was visiting a very high-ranking member of the Communist Party, a man of great power. And he took a wrong turn in this man's house, and he entered a room where the wife of this leader was sitting, and he realized the wife was reading a Bible. And they said, oh, I'm a Christian too. And she said, oh. And he asked her, how did you become a Christian? She said, one time, my husband was traveling to another city, and he'd been on the train. And he said how he'd met an old lady in his compartment. And she'd been coughing and coughing, but she'd told him all about Jesus Christ. And he thought, I'm quite impressed with this, because she's dying, and yet this is what she thinks is the best use of her time. She just needs to travel and talk about Jesus. She said, my husband never became a Christian, but I was impressed with this. So I decided one day to get a Bible and see what the old lady was all about. She said, I became a Christian. And so, apparently, that man, that high-ranking leader of the Communist Party, was very kind toward Christians in his area, and he stopped some major campaigns of persecution against them. And it's interesting to think about that as a way that God works. There's an old lady whom the church said, you're too old to work for God. She didn't think so. God didn't think so. And she traveled the country on mafia money, speaking out the gospel. No one took her seriously. And yet years later, after she had gone, the work she did made a huge difference to many, many Christians. Now that's drama. That's incredible when you think about it, because it's so easy for all of us to think, I'm too old, or I don't have the gifts, or I don't have this, I don't have that, the kind of Moses syndrome when you make excuses to God. And other people sometimes can be quite happy to accept them because they want to do the work. And yet, God always has a use for us, no matter how small the work may be, no matter how humdrum, no matter how old we may be. God has always got a use, and God can always bring fruit out of it, even long after we're dead.